Welcome back, everybody. 14 after the hour, and time for us to go behind the headlines. And the Oregon marijuana activism community, still giddy from celebrating our legalization win, was brought back down to earth with the news of the passing of the great Jim Klahr. Jim was a fixture in the Oregon medical marijuana community. Every legislative session, he could be found at the State House in Salem, working tirelessly to protect and expand the state's medical marijuana program. Despite his extremely fragile personal health, Jim dedicated all the energy he had toward freeing the people who used this miraculous plant. Sadly, that did not include himself. Jim's liver was failing. For the 10 years I'd known Jim Klahr, he was battling constant pain and never once using medical marijuana to alleviate it. Instead, he relied on the many pharmaceuticals prescribed by doctors that kept him alive, drugs that have the known side effect of being toxic to the liver. Wait, you may be thinking, aren't I talking about a sick person in Oregon, the land of 1.5 pound possession and 24 medical marijuana plant limits? Why in the world would someone like Jim Klahr not get a medical marijuana recommendation when he so clearly knew the benefits of medical marijuana and so obviously qualified for a card? Well, Jim did have a medical marijuana card for 9 years, but he never used marijuana while he had that card. Because in Oregon, and most of the states that passed medical marijuana laws in the first 10 years after California, there is no protection against discrimination by Oregon transplant centers against people that use cannabis medically, whether they have a medical marijuana card or not. I first learned about this phenomenon in the story of Tim Guerin, a patient from Seattle. Tim was a professional musician who suffered liver failure. Tim consulted with doctors on his condition. One recommended he used cannabis to deal with the pain, since it is non-hepatotoxic or harmful to the liver. Unfortunately, the hospital where he was on the list to get a new liver discovered this fact and kicked him off the transplant list. See, most organ transplant programs deny new organs to those they deem to be drug abusers. Their rationale is that organs are rare and precious, so they shouldn't be doled out to people who'll just abuse their bodies and end up dead sooner when they could go to a person who'll live cleanly longer. So Tim Guerin was told he could abstain from marijuana for 6 months, and then if he tested clean, then he could get back on the waiting list for a liver. Tim Guerin died within the next 2 weeks. 2 years later, I met my friend Ganja John. He was born with a congenital defect of the kidneys, requiring thrice weekly dialysis and eventual transplantation. He too faced the possibility of missing an organ transplant if he were detected using medical marijuana. But John beat the system by hustling up a prescription from his doctor for Marinol, the synthetic THC that is a legal Schedule III drug in America. He turned up positive in the drug tests, but with that little piece of paper and the fact that the test couldn't distinguish between natural and synthetic marijuana metabolites, John got his kidney and is thriving in Southern Oregon, making world-class hash oil for patients. But Jim never went that route, maybe because the tests are more sophisticated now and can root out the different legal and illegal metabolites, but more likely because Jim wasn't comfortable cheating the system. Now, I mean no disrespect to John. I'd cheat this Kafka-esque system too. But the end result is that one of the most legitimate qualifying patients died this weekend, having never used the medicine for which he fought so gallantly. Jim Klahr went into the hospital shortly after our successful vote to legalize marijuana. He actually entered on election night. Jim's death shows us that we have so much further to go before cannabis consumers are treated as equals by our society. Our legislature and legislatures throughout this country need to pass a Jim Klahr Organ Transplant Protection Act to ensure no deserving transplant patient ever has to make the choice between medical marijuana and a chance at a new organ. Jim Klahr suffered and battled alcoholism throughout his life and told his friends that use of cannabis is what helped him kick alcoholism. It was that alcoholism that so damaged his liver. And he'd been waiting for a transplant ever since ever since I met the man. I can't tell you how many events I'd been at with Jim Klahr where I tried to pass him a joint or a pipe just out of habit. And every single time, without fail, he would deny it. He would pass it up. While everyone around him was using cannabis. Most people medically, some people like me, just because I enjoy using cannabis. And yet Jim Klahr, someone whom even our opponents would point to as a person deserving of medical marijuana, couldn't use that because of institutionalized discrimination against cannabis users. Rest in peace, Jim Klahr. Our condolences from 420 Radio and myself personally go out to your family and your friends on this tremendous loss. We will never forget you, sir.
Yeah, baby.
It does show us how far we have yet to go, and legalization is just the first step. Legalization still leaves us in a Jim Crow